A castle gate groans shut with the finality of a falling mountain. That sound is the voice of the Middle Ages, a declaration of power carved from oak and iron. We are about to uncover why medieval gates were built with such impossible weight. By the end, you will understand the brilliant, brutal logic that turned a simple door into the most sophisticated weapon of its time. What hidden weakness did their immense strength actually protect, and what did the slow creak of those hinges really mean to the people listening? When you stand before an ancient fortress, what is the first question its silence asks you? That deep, resonant groan was a direct answer to the most basic weapon of the siege. Picture a tree trunk, stripped of its branches, its head capped in iron, swung by 20 strong men. This was the battering ram, the sledgehammer of medieval warfare. Its goal was simple: to turn the gate from a barrier into a pile of splinters. The physics are brutal. A charging ram delivers a massive, concentrated punch of kinetic energy, a force that wants to travel through whatever it hits. A thin door, or even a moderately thick one, cannot absorb that shock. It flexes, it cracks, and it fails catastrophically on the first or second strike. The wood simply shatters inward. This is where the sheer, staggering weight of the gate becomes its genius. Those layers of oak, sometimes a foot thick or more, were not just a wall, they were a shock absorber. When the iron-tipped ram struck, the gate's immense mass resisted the initial impulse to fly apart. The energy from the blow did not concentrate on a single spot. Instead, it spread out, dissipating through the entire massive structure, from the iron strapping bands that bound the planks together, right down into the stone frame and the hinges that were more like architectural roots. Think of it like punching a mattress versus punching a brick wall. The mattress gives, absorbing the force. The gate acted like that mattress, but one made of 1,000 pounds of oak. It would shudder, it would groan, but it would not break. The construction was a masterpiece of redundancy. Builders would take the heaviest, densest oak planks they could find and stack them vertically, edge to edge. Then they would bolt or peg a second layer horizontally across the back, creating a cross-grained lattice that denied any easy path for a crack to propagate. Over this, they fixed blacksmith-forged iron bands, the strapping, which acted like a clenched fist holding the whole assembly together. This created a monolithic barrier. Furthermore, the gate's own weight worked against the attacker's momentum. To swing a battering ram effectively, you need rhythm and space. A gate that barely budged when struck robbed the ram team of that critical rebound, that follow-through swing that builds force. They were not just hitting a door, they were trying to move a small building with a tree. Each thunderous blow that echoed through the courtyard was a testament not to the ram's power, but to the gate's stubborn, immovable will. But a battering ram was only the most straightforward of threats. Another nightmare for castle defenders lumbered toward them on wheels: the siege tower. These were multi-story wooden fortresses on the move, armored against arrows, filled with soldiers, and designed to roll right up to the castle walls. Their upper levels held archers to clear the battlements, while a heavy drawbridge at the base could slam down directly onto the wall walk, allowing a flood of attackers to pour across. If a siege tower reached the main gatehouse, that lower drawbridge could drop right in front of the gate itself, creating a protected corridor for a concentrated assault. This is where the gate's location and its weight became a devastating 1-2 punch. The heaviest gates were almost never flush with the outer wall. They were set deep within a stone tunnel, the gatehouse passage. This created a deadly funnel. Even if attackers from a siege tower managed to reach the gate's surface, they were now trapped in a narrow, shadowy stone throat. Above them, openings in the ceiling, the murder holes, gaped open. From those holes, defenders could rain down a horrific torrent, not just arrows, but rocks, quicklime, and yes, boiling water, or hot sand. The gate itself, in this confined space, was the anvil to that hammer. Its immense weight made it impossible to deal with quickly. Imagine a squad of armored men trying to hack through a foot of solid oak with axes in that chaotic, vertical hellscape. Every swing that bit into the dense wood was slow, exhausting work. Prying the gate open with crowbars was a fantasy. The iron bands and internal bracing laughed at the leverage. That gate was not just a barrier, it was a timer. Its sheer, stubborn mass bought the defenders the most precious commodity in a siege: time. Every minute those attackers were stalled in the gatehouse tunnel, exposed and claustrophobic, was another minute for the defenders on the walls to rally, to reposition, and to pour more death from above. The slow, grinding process of trying to defeat the gate turned the assault into a slaughterhouse of the attacker's own making. The siege tower's strength, its ability to deliver men to the very foot of the wall, became its fatal weakness when the destination was that recessed, iron-bound giant of oak. The gate's true power extended far beyond its physical bulk. It was a psychological fortress all its own. To a visitor in times of peace, the slow, deliberate process of entering was a carefully staged ritual of submission. You would approach on horseback or foot, announced by the watchful eyes on the wall. Then came the deep, grinding groan of the massive hinges as the portcullis was winched up, and only after that, the even slower swing of the main gate itself, inch by heavy inch. This was not an entrance, it was an audience. Every second of that delay reinforced a simple, unspoken message: you are entering on our terms, by our permission, into a space we completely control. The gate was the Lord's voice made of wood and iron, a constant, tangible reminder of where his domain began and your freedom ended. For an attacking army, the sight of that gate transformed that message from one of control into one of pure defiance. Before a single arrow was loosed, the gate delivered its first blow to enemy morale. A seasoned commander looking up at that recessed, iron-studded monolith did not just see a door. He saw a math problem. He calculated the weeks of labor to build siege engines, the months of provisions needed to sustain his army, the certainty of heavy casualties in any direct assault on that stone throat. The gate's very appearance whispered a daunting prediction: this will not be a quick victory, this will be a war of attrition, of starvation, of endurance. It promised a costly, grinding ordeal where the walls themselves seemed to sigh with indifference at your efforts. That psychological weight could break an army's spirit before the first ram ever touched the wood. It turned eager soldiers into hesitant men, planting seeds of doubt that could rot a campaign from within. The gate stood as a silent sentinel, not just guarding stone, but defending the very idea of safety, making the fortress within feel less like a target and more like an immutable fact of the landscape. What, then, was the ultimate test for this seemingly perfect defense? What happened when an enemy refused to be demoralized and instead brought a weapon that ignored the gate's weight and psychology entirely? That psychological fortress, however, was built from very real, physical materials. The choice of oak was not an accident of convenience, it was a deliberate selection based on centuries of brutal experience. Builders sought out the oldest, straightest oaks from dense forests, trees that had grown slowly, their rings packed tight. This slow growth gave the wood an incredible density and interlocking grain, making it naturally resistant to splitting. Unlike softer woods that might rot quickly when exposed to the elements, oak contains high levels of tannic acid, a natural preservative that repels insects and fights fungal decay. A gate needed to withstand not just siege, but decades of rain, snow, and sun. Selecting the tree was just the beginning. Once felled, the massive trunks were split into rough planks using wedges and mauls, following the natural grain to preserve strength. These planks were then painstakingly seasoned, left to dry slowly over years to prevent warping and cracking. Rushing this process would create internal weaknesses, hidden faults that a battering ram would exploit in an instant. When the master carpenter finally assembled the gate, he did not simply nail boards together. The planks were often joined with intricate tongue and groove edges, interlocking them like a three-dimensional puzzle. This created a seamless face that denied any easy point of entry for prying tools, and it distributed stress across the entire panel, not just at the fastenings. But wood alone, no matter how well crafted, has its limits. This is where the blacksmith's art entered the equation, transforming the gate from a wooden wall into an iron-bound titan. The most visible metalwork were the reinforcing bands, thick straps of wrought iron hammered hot across the face of the gate in vertical and horizontal patterns. These acted like a corset of steel, holding the planks in compression and preventing them from bowing or bursting outward under impact, yet the true marvels of engineering were often unseen. The hinges, known as hex, were not the small brass fixtures we know today. They were monumental assemblies. The pintle was a giant, upward-pointing iron spike, sometimes as thick as a man's wrist, anchored deep into the stone threshold of the gateway. The heel of the gate itself bore a corresponding massive iron strap, the hollowed hinge, that dropped down over this spike. This created a pivot point of incredible strength, bearing the gate's entire weight on a single, rugged point of forged iron. Forging these components was a feat in itself. Blacksmiths would often set up their portable forges right at the construction site, heating and hammering blooms of iron into shape because transporting such heavy, awkward pieces was nearly impossible. Every strike of the smith's hammer was a calculation against future violence. The lock mechanism, too, was a masterpiece of simple mass. The bar, or drawbar, that secured the gate from the inside was often a tree trunk sheathed in iron, sliding into a deep socket in the opposing wall. The sheer weight of this timber and metal beam meant that even if the external lock was picked or smashed, the gate remained immovable from the outside. So when we speak of the gate's weight, we must remember it was a composite force. It was the density of centuries-old oak, multiplied by the volume of dozens of planks, and then amplified by the sheer mass of hand-forged iron holding it all in a relentless, unyielding grip. This careful marriage of materials created a barrier that was far more than the sum of its parts, but even this pinnacle of medieval craftsmanship had a hidden vulnerability, a weakness that no amount of oak or iron could fully erase. That hidden weakness was the gate's own method of opening. A massive door that swings inward or outward creates a vulnerable moment, a gap through which determined attackers could force their way. The medieval mind, however, rarely relied on a single solution. For every strength, they engineered a backup, and for the main gate's moment of passage, they created the portcullis. This was the gate's deadly, faster sibling, a grating of immense weight designed not for stubborn endurance, but for shocking, instantaneous violence. Imagine the main gate as a ponderous giant, slow and mighty. The portcullis was a guillotine. It was a massive grid of iron or thick wood reinforced with iron, suspended within the stone arch of the gatehouse passage, directly behind the main doors. Its purpose was not just to be another barrier, but to be a trap. While the main gate was a test of patience and engineering, the portcullis was a weapon of timing and terror. Its construction was brutally straightforward. Blacksmiths forged bars as thick as a man's forearm, riveting them together into a latticework grid. The bottom edge was often tipped with spear-like spikes, turning it into a row of massive teeth. This entire assembly, weighing hundreds or even thousands of pounds, was housed in a vertical slot above the passageway, connected by heavy chains or ropes to a winding mechanism in the chamber above, guarded by trusted soldiers. The tactical genius lay in its deployment. A portcullis could be dropped in seconds. A single command, the release of a locking pin, and the great weight of the iron grating would come crashing down, guided by its stone channels. That sheer mass was crucial. It guaranteed a decisive, unstoppable fall. There was no slowing it, no catching it, no holding it back. This speed created the Portcullis' most devastating function, the creation of a killing zone. Picture a cunning scenario. The defenders appear to falter, the main gate is breached, and a wave of attackers surges triumphantly into the dark gatehouse tunnel, thinking victory is at hand. That is the moment the commander above gives the signal. With a thunderous roar of grinding metal and shattering stone, the portcullis slams down behind them, cutting off their retreat. At the same instant, the inner doors ahead of them slam shut. The triumphant advance is now a trapped party, sealed in a stone box. From the murder holes above, the reign of death begins anew, but now with no escape. The portcullis had turned the architectural strength of the gatehouse, its narrow, recessed passage, into a perfect slaughter chamber. Its weight ensured it was not just a door, but a final, irrevocable verdict. It was the definitive answer to anyone who thought getting past the main gate meant getting inside. The immense weight of the gate demanded an equally mighty home. This was not a simple doorway in a wall, it was the gatehouse, a fortress within the fortress designed from the ground up to bear impossible loads and orchestrate maximum violence. Its architecture was a direct response to the physics of its primary tenant. The side walls flanking the passage were not just thick, they were often thicker than the outer curtain wall itself, sometimes reaching 15 or 20 feet of solid masonry. This was necessary to anchor the gate's colossal hinges and absorb the reverberations of every battering ram's strike without crumbling. Above, the ceiling was not a flat timber roof vulnerable to fire, but a soaring stone vault. This arched structure was a masterpiece of medieval engineering, channeling the downward weight of the gatehouse's own battlements and the gate's hanging mechanisms outwards and down into those massive side walls, creating a self-supporting shell of incredible strength. All of this stone and iron existed to create a very specific environment, a controlled space where every advantage belonged to the defender. The gatehouse passage was a deliberate funnel, narrow and long, forcing any attacker who breached the outer doors into a cramped, shadowy corridor. Here, the heavy gate was not the only obstacle, it was the centerpiece of a layered defense. Murder holes in the vaulted ceiling allowed defenders to drop projectiles directly onto the heads of those stalled below. Arrow slits, called meurtrières, were cut into the side walls at oblique angles, allowing crossbowmen to fire into the flanks of the packed crowd with impunity. Often, a second, inner portcullis and gate waited at the far end of the tunnel, meaning an assault had to succeed twice in the worst possible conditions. The lifting mechanism for a drawbridge, if present, was housed in a dedicated chamber above, operated by a massive windlass turned by teams of men. This machinery was protected by the gatehouse's own battlements and could only be reached from inside the castle's inner wards. So the next time you see an ancient gateway, look past the door itself, see the architecture that cradles it, that soaring arch, those impossibly thick walls, the narrow dark passage, they all speak of a single purpose: to transform the act of entering into the ultimate test. The gate's weight was the anvil, and the gatehouse was the hammer poised to fall. Moving a structure that weighed as much as a small house required engineering that was both elegantly simple and brutally strong. The gate did not swing on hinges as we know them today. Instead, its entire colossal mass pivoted on a single, rugged point. At the very bottom of the gate, embedded deep into the stone threshold of the gateway, was a massive iron spike called the pintle. This spike pointed straight up, like a giant, blunt nail driven into the foundation of the world. The heel of the gate itself bore a corresponding iron strap, forged into a deep, hollow socket. When the gate was raised into position, This socket was lowered directly over the spike. In that moment, the gate's entire unimaginable weight, thousands of pounds of oak and iron, came to rest on that one forged point. This was not a bearing that allowed smooth rotation. It was a pivot designed for sheer, unbreakable load bearing. The top of the gate was secured by a heavy strap hinge bolted to the stone archway, but this hinge did not carry the weight. Its job was purely to guide the gate's arc, to keep it from wobbling or twisting as it moved. Every time the gate was opened or closed, it was a monumental effort. There were no ball bearings, no lubricated sleeves. It was the grind of wrought iron on wrought iron, or the groan of dense oak pivoting against a stone socket, a sound of immense friction being slowly, reluctantly overcome. For the heaviest gates, especially those that lifted vertically like a drawbridge, a different kind of mechanical genius took over. A hinged drawbridge, sealing the entrance over a moat, presented an even greater challenge. Lifting that sheer mass straight up against gravity was a task for giants or for cleverness. The solution was the counterweight, hidden within the gatehouse structure, often in a stone box or chamber built into the wall itself, was a mass of material, crushed stone, earth, or lead, that equaled or nearly equaled the weight of the gate. This counterweight was attached to the gate's lifting chains or ropes via a system of pulleys. When the winch was turned to lower the bridge, the counterweight would rise within its hidden shaft, storing potential energy. To raise the bridge again, a team of men would turn the windlass, but they were not lifting the gate's full weight. They were only providing the force needed to overcome friction and start the movement. Once in motion, the descending counterweight did the heavy lifting, pulling the gate back up into the closed position. This clever balancing act transformed an impossible task into a manageable one. A few men on a capstan could control a barrier that could stop an army, all because unseen weights moved in a hidden, silent dance behind the stone. It was a perfect metaphor for the castle's defense, immense, visible power, always dependent on intricate, unseen systems working in perfect harmony. But what happened when an enemy understood these systems too well, when they stopped trying to break the gate and started thinking of ways to trick it or to make its very strength work against the defenders? History is littered with the splintered ruins of castles that learned this lesson too late. For every fortress that stood for centuries, there were those that fell in a night, their downfall often traced directly to a gate that was not heavy enough, not clever enough, or simply betrayed from within. Consider the stark difference between a stronghold like Crac des Chevaliers and those that crumbled quickly. Crac, the great Crusader castle, withstood over a dozen major sieges across 2 centuries. Its gates were part of a labyrinthine defensive approach, forcing enemies through twisting, exposed passages where every door was a bottleneck of death. The gates here did not just bar entry, they orchestrated it, channeling attackers into pre-planned slaughter zones. Their immense weight was the final, unyielding period at the end of a deadly sentence written in stone. Now contrast that with castles captured not by force, but by fraud or fire. In many medieval conflicts, the quickest way past a gate was not to break it, but to bribe the guard tasked with lifting the bar. A bag of silver coins could be far more effective than a month of ramming. Other castles fell because their gates, while impressive in appearance, were made from green, unseasoned timber. When faced with the oldest siege weapon of all, fire, these gates did not just burn, they became towering infernos. The heat would warp the iron bands, the green wood would crack and spit, and in a matter of hours, a gateway would collapse into a pile of ash and glowing metal, leaving a gaping, smoldering hole in the castle's heart. The famous fall of Chateau-Gaillard, Richard the Lionheart's saucy castle, is a masterclass in exploiting a gate's secondary weakness. The outer bailey was taken not by attacking the main gate, but by soldiers daringly climbing up the latrine chutes. Once inside, they were able to attack the inner defenses from within, yet even then, the core keeps and their gates held until starvation took its toll. These stories were not just footnotes in chronicles, they were the case studies that master builders pored over. Every collapsed gate, every bribed sentry, every successful night attack was a failure analyzed. The response was the evolution we have been tracing, the move towards overwhelming, immutable mass, a gate so heavy it could not be quickly burned, a gatehouse so deep and layered that a single traitor could not open the entire way. A design so redundant that even if one part was compromised, 3 others remained. The heavy gate was not born from a theory of perfect defense, but from a brutal autopsy of defeat. It was the answer to a very simple, very expensive question asked by kings who had lost castles and the lives within them: what will stop this from happening again? The answer was weight, complexity, and time, engineered into a single, groaning structure, so the next time you hear about a siege that lasted for months or years, understand that the goal was rarely to smash the gate on the first day. The real strategy was to make the defenders, staring at that unmovable object from inside, question everything it was supposed to protect. Oak and iron, however, were not the final word in the gate's evolution. For the wealthiest lords and the most strategically vital citadels, there was a next step, a transformation that pushed the concept of weight into a new realm of defensive obsession. They began to sheath their gates in skin, not metaphorically but literally. Before the age of full metal plating, a common reinforcement was a layer of fire-resistant leather or untreated animal hides. These raw skins, often kept soaked in water during a siege, were nailed directly over the wooden face. When dry, the leather was tough and resisted glancing blows, but its true purpose was revealed when the flames came. Fire was the gate's silent, patient nemesis. Attackers would bundle oil-soaked rags and straw into faggots, pile them against the base of the gate, and set them ablaze. The goal was not a dramatic explosion, but a slow, insidious cook. The heat would seep into the wood, drying it from the inside out, baking the moisture from its fibers until the entire structure became brittle and ready to combust. The iron bands conducting the heat would actually hasten this process, weakening the wood they were meant to protect. A leather cladding changed this equation. The wet hides acted as a sacrificial blanket. The fire's heat would first have to boil away the moisture saturating the skin, a process that consumed enormous energy and created a protective curtain of steam. This brought the defenders on the battlements above critical minutes to respond. Buckets of water, or more cleverly, vinegar, which was believed to better quench flames, could be poured down from the murder holes, dousing the fire before it ever touched the wood beneath. But leather was only a stopgap. The ultimate expression of this principle was the metal-clad gate. Here, craftsmen took the iron strapping to its logical extreme, covering the entire outer surface of the gate in overlapping plates of wrought iron, riveted directly into the dense oak heartwood. This created a monolithic shell, a carapace of forged steel. The weight added was staggering, perhaps doubling the gate's already immense mass, and it demanded even more robust hinges and foundations. Yet the benefits were transformative. An axe or sword would simply glance off this armored skin, its edge turning to useless scrap. A battering ram would strike not wood, but a solid, ringing wall of metal, dissipating its force across an even wider, harder surface. Most importantly, it was the ultimate answer to fire. The iron plating turned the gate into a colossal heat sink. When flames licked at its surface, the metal would absorb and distribute the thermal energy across its entire area, preventing any single spot from reaching the kindling point of the wood behind it. While the outer surface might glow a dull red in places, the oak within, insulated by the metal's conductivity and its own dense mass, would remain protected. The gate would become hot, even unbearable to touch, but it would not burn. It would stand, a blackened, smoldering sentinel, radiating defiance as much as heat. This transformation came at a cost beyond mere weight. A metal-clad gate was a statement of terrifying wealth and technological reach, a declaration that the lord within could command not just forests, but mines, forges, and armies of specialized craftsmen. It signaled that this threshold was not merely defended, but inviolable by any conventional means of the age. The gate was no longer just a barrier, it had become a fortress wall in its own right, mobile and sealed. Yet even this pinnacle of defensive engineering could not solve the oldest problem of all, a problem that lived and breathed behind the walls. What happened when the greatest threat to the gate came not from outside, but from within the castle's own heart? That iron-clad titan guarding the gate was a ledger entry made solid. The sheer weight of a major castle gate represented an astronomical investment, a concentration of wealth and labor so dense it could pivot on a single spike. Every pound of oak, every ounce of wrought iron, told a story of economic power. The journey began in the forest, with teams of woodsmen seeking out specific, ancient oaks. These were not just trees, they were capital assets. In many kingdoms, such prime timber was the property of the crown, and a license to cut them was a significant privilege, often granted as a reward for loyalty or purchased with heavy fees. Felling and roughly shaping these giants required specialized tools and skilled woodsmen, men whose labor was a continuous cost from the first axe swing to the final planing of a seasoned plank. Then came the blacksmith's work. Iron was not a cheap commodity. Mining the ore, smelting it in charcoal-fired bloomeries that consumed entire forests for fuel, and then hammering the raw metal into pure, workable wrought iron was a process that demanded not just miners and smelters, but armies of charcoal burners. The iron for a single gate's strapping and hinges could represent the output of a small mine for months. The blacksmith himself was a master artisan, one of the most valued and highly paid craftsmen on any site. His days of heating, hammering, and shaping those monumental hinges and bands were billed at a premium, but perhaps the greatest hidden cost was movement. How do you transport a 50-foot oak beam or a half-ton iron hinge across a roadless medieval landscape? The answer is, with immense difficulty and even more expense. Timber was often floated down rivers when possible, a risky operation that could see valuable logs lost to currents or snags. Over land, it required teams of oxen, specially built reinforced carts, and crews of laborers to clear and sometimes pave the route ahead. The logistical effort to bring just the raw materials to the building site was a campaign in itself, so when a visiting noble or a rival lord approached a castle and saw that recessed, iron-studded monstrosity of a gate, he was not just seeing a door. He was reading a balance sheet. Its weight was a direct, unsubtle proclamation. It said the man inside commanded forests, controlled mines, employed armies of artisans, and could move mountains of material to his will. That gate was a deterrent long before any siege began. It communicated that the lord within had the resources to withstand a long, costly war of attrition. An aggressor would look at that gate and instantly recalculate the entire campaign. Could he afford the years of siege required to starve out a man who could build such a thing? Did he have the wealth to match that display of defensive commitment? Often, the answer was no. The gate's most powerful function was sometimes to make the enemy turn his army around and go home, defeated by economics before a single arrow was knocked. Yet this fortress of wood and iron, for all its symbolic and physical might, was not a permanent fixture. It had a lifespan, and its eventual failure was as inevitable as the seasons. Even the strongest gate could be undone by a silent, patient enemy. This foe was not an army with rams, but the slow, relentless work of rain, sun, and time. A gate of such immense weight was in a constant, hidden battle against its own decay. The very elements that gave it strength also made it vulnerable. Oak, while dense and resistant, is still organic. Left exposed to driving rain and winter damp, moisture would seep into the microscopic pores of the wood. In the dark, stagnant recesses of the gatehouse tunnel, away from drying sunlight, this trapped water invited rot. Soft, white fungal threads would spread through the heartwood, digesting the tough cellulose fibers from the inside out. A gate could appear perfectly solid from the outside, its iron bands gleaming, while deep within its core, a spongy weakness was spreading like a secret betrayal. This rot was an insidious threat because it attacked the gate's integrity without a single blow being struck. A battering ram striking a sound oak panel might shudder and fail. That same ram hitting a panel hollowed by rot would find a catastrophic collapse, the wood crumbling into damp splinters around the iron strapping that now had nothing left to hold together. The metal components faced their own relentless adversary, the iron of the hinges and bands, constantly exposed to moisture in the air, would begin to rust. This was not merely a cosmetic issue. Rust is iron oxide, a brittle, flaking compound that occupies more volume than the original metal. As it formed, it created immense internal pressure. A rusting hinge band, locked tightly around its oak core, could actually split the wood it was meant to protect as the corroding metal expanded. Worse, rust ate away at the metal itself, thinning the critical straps and weakening the monumental pintle and socket until, under the gate's colossal weight, they risked shearing apart completely. The gate's own mass amplified every flaw. Any slight warping of a major timber from uneven drying put asymmetric stress on the entire assembly, straining iron rivets and pulling at stone anchor points. The constant grinding friction every time the gate was moved wore down the pivot points, both metal and stone, in a slow, inevitable erosion. This meant the gate's defense was never a one-time achievement. It was a continuous, labor-intensive campaign of maintenance, a hidden cost that drained a castle's resources in peacetime as surely as any siege. The castle carpenter and the blacksmith were as vital to security as the captain of the guard. Their work was dangerous and demanded immense skill. Replacing a single rotten plank in a foot-thick, iron-bound lattice was a surgical operation. First, the massive drawbar had to be secured, and the gate often needed to be propped with temporary timber braces to relieve pressure. Then, the blacksmith would carefully drill out the rivets holding the iron bands over the compromised section. Only then could the carpenter cut out the diseased wood and fashion a new plank to fit the precise, complex joinery, sealing the fresh timber with tar or animal fat before the iron was hammered back into place with new hot rivets. The hinges demanded constant attention. They required regular greasing with thick animal tallow to reduce the deafening groan of friction and prevent seizure. The stone socket that bore the pintle's immense pressure had to be inspected for cracks, and the iron spike itself checked for fatigue. A failure here would not mean a breach, it would mean catastrophe, the entire gate collapsing inward in a sudden, thunderous crash of splintered wood and twisted metal, leaving the castle's throat utterly exposed. So the gate stood not just as a barrier against outsiders, but as a demanding master to those within. Its groaning protest was not only a warning to enemies, but a reminder to the castle's stewards of the endless, costly vigilance required to keep their symbol of power from succumbing to the quiet violence of the air and the rain. This silent war against decay asked a profound question. If the gate's greatest weakness was time itself, how did its legacy survive long after the last castle garrison had gone home? The gate's war against decay was a quiet, daily struggle, but its most dramatic transformation occurred at castles surrounded by water. Here, the heavy gate did not just swing or pivot, it performed a daily vertical ballet, becoming a bridge. The drawbridge was a moving heavy gate, a dual-purpose marvel that had to solve two opposing problems. When lowered, it needed to be a stable, trustworthy roadway across a moat, capable of supporting carts, horses, and marching soldiers without flexing or groaning under the strain. Its weight was not a liability here, but a source of solidity. A thick, massive timber platform laid across the gap provided the necessary rigidity, turning a treacherous ditch into a firm path. Yet at a moment's notice, this same dependable bridge had to vanish, transforming into an impassable, vertical wall sealing the castle's throat. In the raised position, its weight was again its greatest asset. The drawbridge had to slot perfectly into the stone arch of the gateway, its outer surface flush with the surrounding masonry to present a seamless, unbroken barrier that denied attackers any handhold or leverage. A light, flimsy bridge might leave gaps, or worse, be vulnerable to being hooked and pulled down by besiegers. The sheer, immovable mass of a proper drawbridge made such tricks impossible. It became part of the wall itself, a section of the fortress that could be made to disappear and reappear at will. This daily miracle of engineering demanded a hidden symphony of mechanics. Lifting thousands of pounds of oak and iron straight up against gravity was a task for giants or for cleverness. The solution lived in the gatehouse chamber above, a room filled with the smell of hemp rope, hot grease, and sweat. Here, the massive lifting chains, each link as thick as a man's thumb, were anchored to the top of the drawbridge. These chains ran over stout wooden pulleys mounted in the ceiling, redirecting their force to the central power source, the windlass. This was a colossal horizontal drum, turned by wooden spokes inserted into sockets around its circumference. Teams of men, walking in a circle like oxen, would push these spokes, winding the chains around the drum and hauling the bridge upward. But the true genius was the counterweight system. Often built into a hidden vertical shaft within the gatehouse wall was a stone or lead box filled with rubble or scrap metal. This counterweight was connected to the opposite end of the windlass or to a separate set of chains. Its mass was carefully calculated to nearly balance the weight of the drawbridge itself. When the team lowered the bridge, they were actually controlling its descent as the counterweight rose in its shaft, storing potential energy. To raise it again, their effort was not to lift the full dead weight, but simply to overcome friction and start the movement. Once in motion, the descending counterweight did the heavy lifting, pulling the bridge smoothly back into its sealed position. This elegant balance of forces turned an impossible daily task into a manageable routine, all powered by a hidden mass moving in silent opposition to the gate. It was a perfect daily demonstration of the castle's core principle, that immense visible strength always depended on intricate, unseen systems working in perfect harmony. The gate's immense weight did not end the conversation, it simply raised the stakes. Faced with a barrier that laughed at conventional force, medieval commanders were forced to become engineers, to think not just about breaking the gate, but about defeating the entire system that supported it. This sparked a brutal arms race where every defensive innovation was met with a more destructive answer. The first and most obvious adaptation was to the battering ram itself. If a standard ram bounced off the gate, the solution was to build a heavier, more protected one. The simple log gave way to sophisticated machines. Rams were housed in long, shed-like structures called tortoises or cats, their roofs covered in fire-resistant hides and sod to protect the crew from the deadly rain from the murder holes. The ram's head evolved from a simple iron cap into a pointed, metal-sheathed beak, designed not just to smash, but to splinter and pry. Some were even suspended from chains within their protective housing, allowing the crew to swing it with greater momentum and rhythm, turning it into a relentless, pounding pendulum. The goal was no longer a single, shattering blow, but a sustained, localized assault on one spot, using the ram's increased mass to fatigue the wood and slowly worry the iron strapping loose over hours or even days of constant, thunderous impact. But a truly clever commander knew that the gate's strength was its location, so why attack the gate itself when you could attack the ground it stood on? This led to the dark, claustrophobic art of sapping, or mining. Teams of diggers, often skilled men recruited from mining regions, would start a tunnel far from the walls, digging diagonally downward and then horizontally, aiming for the very foundations of the gatehouse tower. Their work was silent and invisible, a hidden knife aimed at the castle's Achilles heel. Once directly beneath the stonework, they would excavate a chamber, shoring it up with wooden timbers. The final terrifying act was to fill this chamber with brushwood and fat, set it ablaze, and retreat. As the supporting timbers burned away, the chamber would collapse, and with a deep, grinding roar, the massive stonework above, the gatehouse itself, would crack and settle, or sometimes catastrophically cave in. If successful, the gate was not breached, it was buried, rendered irrelevant under the rubble of its own home. The ultimate expression of this indirect approach was the trebuchet. This giant sling, capable of hurling a 300-pound stone over 500 feet, was not precise enough to hit the gate itself. Its target was the gatehouse. The strategy was architectural assassination. By launching a relentless barrage of stone blocks, or even diseased carcasses, directly at the gatehouse walls and towers, the attackers aimed to batter the structure into submission. A direct hit could shatter merlons, collapse sections of wall walk, and most critically, weaken the stone arches that bore the gate's weight. The goal was to cause a structural failure, to make the gatehouse itself collapse inwards, crushing the gate and its defenders in a tomb of their own masonry. Each of these methods turned the gate's greatest strength against it. Its weight demanded a massive, immovable stone frame. The attacker's genius was to realize that frame could be broken. So the siege became a grim contest of patience and engineering, where the groaning of heavy hinges was answered by the deeper groan of stressed stone, and the true battle was often fought in the darkness, either in a smoke-filled tunnel beneath the earth or in the slow, relentless calculus of which would fail first, the attacker's resources or the defender's walls. That daily ballet of mechanics was matched by a powerful social ceremony. Every sunrise and sunset, the castle's heartbeat was measured by the groan of its gate. This was not a simple chore, it was a deliberate, symbolic ritual that governed the very rhythm of life within the walls. The opening at dawn was an act of controlled vulnerability. The captain of the guard would give the order, the winch teams would strain, and with a deep, protesting creak, the drawbridge would begin its slow descent and the great doors would swing inward. Often, this moment was announced by a trumpet blast or the ringing of a specific bell, a sound that carried across the surrounding town and fields. It was a declaration that the Lord's protection was now extended, that commerce and travel could commence under his watchful eye. The gate's immense weight made this a slow, deliberate process, one that could not be rushed. This slowness was the point. It forced everyone, merchants with carts, farmers with produce, visiting knights, to pause and gather. It created a natural bottleneck where all who entered could be seen, assessed, and, if necessary, questioned by the guards. The gate, in its ponderous movement, acted as a filter, controlling not just who came in, but the very pace at which the outside world was allowed to touch the inner sanctum. The closing at dusk was an even more profound ritual. As the light faded, the trumpet would sound again, this time with a more urgent, final note. The guards would call out, urging stragglers from the fields or the taverns in the outer bailey to hurry inside. Then began the great grinding sequence, the drawbridge rising, the portcullis descending, and finally, the thunderous boom as the main gate itself was shut and the massive timber bar slid home into its stone socket. The sound of that bar dropping was the definitive period at the end of the day's sentence. In that moment, the castle transformed. It severed its connection to the wider world and became a sealed, self-contained universe. The transition was absolute, from the open possibility of day to the closed security of night, from the known roads to the guarded mysteries within. This ritual reinforced the social order every single day. The Lord, by controlling the gate, controlled time itself. He decided when the day began and ended for hundreds of people. His authority was made audible in the groan of the hinges and visible in the sheer effort of the men who moved them. This ceremony governed everything. The flow of goods was taxed and inspected at that threshold. News from the outside world, carried by messengers and travelers, entered there first, making the gatehouse the castle's sensory organ. More importantly, the ritual of the gate defined belonging. To be inside after the bar dropped was to be under the Lord's peace and protection. To be outside was to be in the wilderness, exposed to dangers both real and imagined. The gate's physical heft made this separation tangible and absolute. You could not sneak in after dark. The barrier was too massive to move quietly. You could not argue with its closure. The process was too monumental to reverse on a whim. Its weight, therefore, was not just a military specification, it was a social tool. It taught obedience through sheer physical inevitability. Every resident, from the highest knight to the lowest servant, lived by the gate's schedule, their lives punctuated by its opening and closing, a constant reminder that their safety was a gift granted and revoked by the will of the man who held the keys to that impossible, magnificent door. The sheer weight of a Northern European oak gate was a product of its environment, a response to the vast forests and the siege tactics of the region. But if you traveled across the continent, you would find that the same defensive problem inspired brilliantly different solutions, each shaped by local materials, climate, and the nature of the threat. In the dense, rainy woodlands of places like England and France, timber was plentiful and iron was the precious addition. The result was the monolithic, iron-bound gate we have been following, a fortress of wood amplified by metal. Its weight was its identity. Move southeast, however, to the drier, stone-rich landscapes of the Byzantine Empire, and the recipe flipped. Here, at the legendary capital of Constantinople, the famous Theodosian walls presented a different kind of barrier. The outer gates were still formidable, but the emphasis shifted. Stone was the primary material, and the gates themselves, while heavy, were often sheathed more extensively in bronze or iron, creating a gleaming, metallic face that reflected the Mediterranean sun. These were gates designed to impress as much as to resist, their surfaces sometimes decorated with crosses or imperial insignia, turning the act of passing through into a submission to both divine and imperial authority. The sheer cost of such metalwork was itself a statement, a different kind of weight measured in treasury gold rather than forest timber, yet the principle was identical: to create an entrance so physically and psychologically daunting that it dictated the terms of any assault. Venture further into the fortifications of the Middle East, and you encounter a masterclass in defensive geometry. While European castles often relied on the deep, single-throat gatehouse, Middle Eastern and Crusader-era designs frequently employed a more elaborate sequence, the barbican. This was not merely a gate, but an entire outer fortress guarding the approach. Attackers would have to breach an outer gate, only to find themselves in a narrow, walled courtyard, completely exposed to fire from all sides. Then, and only then, would they face the main inner gate, often set at an angle to prevent a straight charge. This design used space and confusion as its weapons. The goal was never to have one impossibly heavy door, but to have a series of formidable barriers that broke an attack into stages, each more deadly than the last. The inner gate might be lighter than a Northern European counterpart because it did not have to do all the work alone. It was the final piece in a lethal trap. From the rain-slicked oak of an English keep to the sun-blasted bronze of a Byzantine portal to the cunning stone funnel of a desert fortress, the objective never wavered: control. The materials changed, the architecture adapted, but the core commandment remained: the threshold must be the hardest place on earth. Each culture, with the resources and ingenuity at its disposal, answered the same relentless question: how do you make entering an ordeal that no enemy would willingly choose? This evolution reveals that the heavy gate was not a single invention, but a universal idea, endlessly refined, and in that refinement, we find its most surprising legacy, one that has nothing to do with war, and everything to do with the stories we still tell about the world it sealed away. The gate's reign, built on the stubborn logic of mass, met its end not with a louder groan, but with a thunderous crack. The agent of its obsolescence was a simple black powder that changed the mathematics of force forever. The advent of effective cannon and gunpowder in the late medieval period did not just challenge the heavy gate, it rendered its core principle irrelevant. For centuries, the equation was simple: a gate's weight could absorb and dissipate the kinetic energy of a swinging ram or a hacking axe, but a cannonball introduced a new, terrifying variable: velocity. A solid iron shot, fired from even an early bombard, arrived with a force orders of magnitude greater than any human-powered weapon. It delivered a shockwave of energy so sudden and concentrated that no wooden structure, regardless of its thickness or iron binding, could hope to absorb it. The dense oak did not just splinter, it exploded into a blizzard of deadly shrapnel. The very iron bands that held it together became jagged projectiles, flying inward to kill the defender's mast behind it. A gate that could stall an army for months could now be reduced to kindling in an afternoon. This fundamental shift in power forced a complete reimagining of fortification from the ground up. Architects and military engineers realized that towering vertical walls were now targets, not shields. A cannonball striking a flat, high wall transferred all its energy directly into the masonry, blasting a hole and collapsing entire sections. The response was the Trace Italian, or the Star Fort. Walls were lowered and made massively thicker, often with earthen ramparts packed behind stone facings to absorb impacts. Most crucially, they were angled and sloped. The new design philosophy was not about absorption, but deflection. A cannonball striking a sloped, rounded bastion was more likely to glance off harmlessly, its energy redirected into the air rather than the fortress's heart. In this new landscape, the gate could no longer be the proud, prominent linchpin of defense. To make it a focal point was to paint a bullseye on it. Instead, gateways became subtle, almost hidden vulnerabilities buried within the new geometry. They were tucked deep behind complex outworks, protected by zigzagging approach roads called ravelins and hornworks that exposed any attacking force to flanking fire from multiple bastions. The gate itself became smaller, less imposing, and often sheathed entirely in iron or set within a recessed, blast-resistant arch. The age of the primary, monolithic heavy gate as the symbolic and practical heart of the castle was decisively over. Its successor was not a door, but an entire landscape of earth and stone designed to make the very approach to the threshold a suicidal endeavor. The gate's immense weight, once its greatest virtue, had become a relic, a testament to a world where defense was a matter of inches and endurance, not feet per second and instantaneous ruin. So if the heavy gate is gone, why does its shadow still loom so large in our imagination, and what silent messages does it still whisper from the ruins? The thunderous crack of cannon fire may have ended the gate's reign, but it did not silence its story. Today, a different kind of investigation is underway, one that uses the quiet tools of science to listen to what these ancient giants have to say. Historians and engineers have become detectives, and the gate itself is their witness. They are no longer just admiring its weight, they are measuring its every heartbeat. One of the most powerful techniques is dendrochronology, the science of tree ring dating. When conservators take a tiny core sample from an ancient oak plank, they are not damaging history, they are reading its diary. Each ring tells a story of a single year, its width revealing whether that year brought plentiful rain or punishing drought. By matching the pattern of wide and narrow rings to master chronologies built from thousands of trees, scientists can pinpoint the exact year the tree was cut down. This turns a simple piece of timber into a precise timestamp. We can now know, for instance, that the oaks for a particular gate were felled in the dry summer of 1284, perhaps from a royal forest 50 miles away. This data reveals supply chains, construction timelines, and even economic pressures, transforming the gate from a static monument into a living record of medieval resource management. The ironwork undergoes its own forensic examination. Using portable X-ray fluorescence scanners, researchers can analyze the metal composition of a hinge or strap without so much as scratching its surface. The mix of elements tells a tale of the smelting process. High levels of phosphorus might indicate the ore came from a specific region, while the presence of slag inclusions reveals the skill or occasional haste of the blacksmith. By understanding the metallurgy, we learn not just how strong the iron is, but how it was made, connecting the gate to the mines and forges that powered the medieval world. But perhaps the most dramatic modern analysis happens inside a computer. Engineers create intricate digital models of these gates, simulating the forces they were built to endure. They input the known density of seasoned oak, the tensile strength of hand-forged iron, and the precise geometry of the hinges. Then, they run the simulations. A virtual battering ram strikes the digital gate with the force of 20 men. The software visualizes stress, showing in brilliant color where the energy flows, how the iron bands tense, and where the oak flexes. These models confirm the intuitive genius of the builders. They show that the weight was perfectly distributed to channel immense force down into the stone socket and out along the reinforcing straps, just as the master carpenter and blacksmith intended centuries ago. This marriage of ancient craft and modern science does more than satisfy curiosity. It deepens our awe. We are not just looking at a big, old door. We are beginning to understand the precise calculations, the intimate knowledge of materials, and the profound practical wisdom that went into its creation. The gate's groan was not just the sound of wood straining, it was the sound of physics being mastered with an axe and a hammer. Hollywood loves a good castle siege, but the truth is often heavier than fiction. One of the most persistent myths is the flaming arrow, shot dramatically across the moat to ignite the gate in a single heroic moment. In reality, a single arrow wrapped in burning pitch would have fizzled out against the surface of a well-maintained gate. As we have seen, these barriers were often clad in fire-resistant leather or iron. Even untreated oak, especially when green or kept damp by the climate, was incredibly difficult to ignite with a small, fleeting flame. Setting a serious fire required a sustained effort, piling oil-soaked brush and timber directly against the base and protecting the men doing it, a far cry from the elegant arc of a single shot. The gate's defenses were designed precisely to turn such a dramatic Hollywood moment into a wet, sputtering disappointment. Another cinematic shortcut is the ease of movement. We often see a hero or a villain give a mighty shove to swing a massive gate open or closed. This ignores the fundamental physics of the thing. A gate weighing several tons, pivoting on a single iron pintle ground into stone, does not move with a push. It moves with the coordinated strain of a team of men, or the slow, grinding turn of a windlass. The friction alone was monumental. Opening the main gate was a deliberate, noisy, and labor-intensive operation. never a solitary act of strength. It was a process that announced itself with deep, groaning protests from the wood and metal, a sound of immense power being reluctantly mobilized. Perhaps the most misrepresented element is the portcullis. On screen, it is often a lightweight, decorative grille that characters can sometimes even hold back with their bare hands as it descends. The historical reality was a guillotine made of iron. A true portcullis was a lattice of bars as thick as your forearm, weighing hundreds or thousands of pounds. When its release was triggered, it did not lower, it fell. Its descent was a sudden, catastrophic event, guided by stone channels to ensure it crashed home with unstoppable force. No human could slow its drop, let alone stop it. That terrifying finality was the entire point. It was a weapon of instant, decisive violence, not a flimsy obstacle. So while the movies give us thrilling spectacle, the real story is found in the weight, the grind, and the sheer, uncompromising mass that made these structures the formidable hearts of medieval defense. Warwick Castle's gatehouse stands as a textbook carved in stone, a perfect physical lesson of everything we have explored. Approaching it, you first confront a formidable outer gate, a barrier of thick oak and iron that sets the tone of brute strength. But passing through this initial door does not grant entry, it grants admission to a trap. You find yourself in a narrow, shadowy corridor of stone, a throat about 30 feet long. The ceiling here is not solid, it is punctuated by square openings, the murder holes. From these, defenders could drop not just arrows, but heavy stones or cauldrons of heated sand directly onto anyone stalled below. The walls on either side are not blank, they are studded with narrow vertical slits, arrow loops angled to give archers inside a sweeping field of fire along the entire passage while offering them almost complete protection. An attacker who breached the outer gate would now be packed into this confined space, exposed to a deadly rain from above and a crossfire from the sides, with no room to maneuver or raise a proper shield. Their only way out is forward toward the next barrier. Halfway down this deadly funnel, a second portcullis once waited, its stone channels still visible in the walls, ready to slam down and cut the assault in two. Finally, at the far end, loomed the inner gate, another massive construction of wood and iron. The genius is in the sequence. Each heavy gate and portcullis was not an isolated obstacle, but a chapter in a short, brutal story. The outer gate forced a bottleneck, the murder hole corridor became the killing zone, the inner portcullis could seal it shut, and the final gate stood as the unyielding conclusion. The materials tell their own tale. The stonework is local sandstone, thick and enduring. The slots for the massive timber bars that secured the gates are still there, worn smooth by the passage of the heavy beams. You can see the recesses where the portcullis was housed and the grooves that guided its fall. This architecture makes the principles tangible. The weight of the gates was not just about stopping force, it was about controlling movement, dictating the pace and place of the attack. At Warwick, an enemy did not just face a door, they entered a meticulously designed machine where every component, from the heaviest gate to the smallest arrow slit, worked in concert to transform strength into vulnerability. It is a chillingly efficient design, one that turns the simple act of walking forward into the most dangerous journey imaginable. Every thunderous groan of the gate echoed the blacksmith's hammer. The true architects of its weight were not just the lords who ordered it, but the nameless smiths whose forges glowed at the edge of the construction site. These men did not work in small shops, they commanded industrial operations under open-sided sheds, their anvils mounted on tree stumps driven into the earth. The scale of their task was staggering. To forge the hardware for a single major gatehouse, the pintle hinges, the lock bars, the portcullis grid, could require more iron than an entire village used in a decade. First came the raw material, Iron ore was dug from bogs or shallow mines, a dirty, dangerous labor. This ore then had to be smelted in a bloomery, a furnace built from clay and stone. The real fuel, however, was charcoal, and it consumed forests. To produce the pure, workable wrought iron for a gate's fittings, smiths needed mountains of it. Charcoal burners lived for weeks in the woods, carefully tending smoky mounds of hardwood, transforming 10 cords of oak into just 1 ton of the black fuel. This charcoal was then fed into the bloomery's fire, burning at a fierce heat to separate the molten iron from the rocky slag. What emerged was not a liquid pool, but a spongy, glowing mass called a bloom, riddled with impurities. This bloom was the starting point. The master smith and his apprentices would heat this ragged lump in their forge and then attack it with sledgehammers, folding and refolding the metal, driving out the slag, and gradually consolidating it into a dense, pure bar of wrought iron. This process, called drawing out, was repeated over and over. To make a single hinge strap 6 feet long and 2 inches thick, they might have to draw and weld multiple bars together, each welding a critical moment where the metal had to be at the perfect, sparkling heat. There was no modern welding, no arc or gas torch. Welding was done by eye and feel. The smith would heat 2 pieces of iron until they were a blinding yellow-white, almost sparking, then quickly overlay them on the anvil and strike with precise, heavy blows. The goal was to fuse the molecular fibers of the 2 pieces into one seamless whole. A cold strike or a moment's delay, and the weld would be weak, a hidden flaw that could doom the entire gate under load. The final shaping of components like the massive pintle hinge or the portcullis bar was a test of strength and endurance. These were not items that could be lifted by one man. Teams would maneuver the glowing metal with long tongs, while others swung heavy hammers in rhythm, their strikes ringing out like a discordant bell. The smith's artistry lay in his intimate knowledge of the metal's soul, knowing exactly how many heats it would take, how it would move under the hammer, and when it was strong enough. When they finally drove the last rivet to secure an iron band to the oak, they were not just fastening metal to wood. They were transferring the accumulated energy of 100 charcoal mounds, 1,000 hammer blows, and a lifetime of skill into the gate's very bones. The weight you hear in its groan is, in large part, the weight of their forgotten labor. That weight forged a soundscape as powerful as any wall. The groan of the gate was not just a byproduct of friction, it was a deliberate acoustic signature, a language spoken in bass notes and thunder. Every component of the heavy gate contributed to this orchestra of security. The massive iron pintle grinding in its stone socket produced a deep, resonant moan, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The swing of the oak itself, with its incredible mass moving through the air, created a low, rushing whisper, like a forest moving in slow motion, and then came the final act, the deep, definitive thud as the gate met its stone frame, a sound you felt in your chest as much as you heard with your ears. This was not a door closing, it was a world sealing itself shut. For the people living within the castle walls, this sound sequence was the ultimate comfort. As dusk fell and the noises of the day faded, the great groan and the final boom were a lullaby of safety. It meant the drawbridge was raised, the portcullis was down, and the bar was home. It signaled the transition from a vulnerable, open day to a secure, closed night. Children fell asleep to that sound, knowing the wilderness was locked out. Guards on the night watch took their posts with its echo still in the air, a reminder of the barrier they guarded. It was the audible proof of the Lord's promise of protection, a daily ritual that reinforced a profound psychological peace. For a visitor or a merchant leaving at sunset, the sound carried a different message. As they hurried across the bridge before it rose, that initial groan was a warning, a reminder that hospitality had limits and the Lord's domain was about to become absolute. To be caught outside after the final thud was to be exiled, left in the growing dark beyond the circle of firelight and community. The sound was a social boundary made audible. But during a siege, this acoustic signature transformed into a weapon of psychological warfare. For the attacking army camped in the mud beyond the walls, the sounds from the gatehouse were a constant, demoralizing taunt. They would hear the portcullis rattle up and slam down during a sortie, a sound of shocking, violent finality that spoke of a fortress utterly in control of its own thresholds. The groan of the main gate opening might signal a cavalry charge erupting toward them, or it might be a false alarm, a mind game to keep them perpetually on edge. Most haunting of all would be the days when they heard nothing new from the gate, only the normal sounds of life within, muffled by the walls, while their own gate, that immovable object, sat in silent, heavy defiance. Its silence was as loud as its groan, a constant acoustic reminder of their failure and the endurance of the people inside. The weight of the materials dictated every aspect of this sound. Light gates squeak, heavy gates groan, flimsy portcullises clatter, a true portcullis crashes. The density of the oak, the mass of the iron, the sheer scale of the moving parts, all combined to produce frequencies that were felt as much as heard, vibrations that communicated power on a primal level. This was security you could listen to, a barrier that announced its own strength with every movement. In a world without electric lights or alarms, this acoustic atmosphere was a critical layer of defense, shaping emotions and dictating behavior through sound alone. The silent groan of a gate is a sound that preservationists now strain to hear. Across Europe, the heavy gates that survived sieges face a new, relentless enemy, the slow decay of peace. In castle ruins open to the sky, a gate exposed to centuries of rain and sun is a heartbreaking sight. The once dense oak, hollowed by rot, crumbles into a spongy, dark mass. The magnificent iron strapping, now a brittle lace of rust, flakes away at a touch. The very weight that made the gate formidable now accelerates its demise as gravity pulls on weakened joints and rust-weakened metal. Preserving these titans is not a matter of simple cleaning, it is a race against physics and chemistry, a battle to keep history's weight from collapsing under its own mass. The work begins with a forensic assessment. Conservators use moisture meters to map the internal rot of timber and ultrasonic testers to measure the thickness of corroded iron without damaging it. The goal is never to make the gate look new, but to stabilize it exactly as it is, to halt decay in its tracks. For the wood, this often means a painstaking process of consolidation. Special resins, thin as water, are injected deep into the rotten cavities. These liquids seep into the crumbling cellular structure of the oak and then harden, bonding the fragile wood fibers together from the inside out. It is like giving the timber a new skeleton, one that restores structural integrity without altering the ancient, weathered surface you see. Sometimes, if a key structural plank is too far gone, a difficult decision must be made. The rotten section is carefully cut out, and a new piece of aged oak, shaped with traditional hand tools, is grafted in. This is not a disguise, but an honest repair, a way to allow the gate to continue bearing its own weight for another century. The iron presents a different, more aggressive challenge. Rust is a cancer that feeds on the metal, and left unchecked, it will reduce a hinge to orange dust. Simply removing all the rust would strip away the gate's history, its very skin. Instead, conservators use precise techniques to convert the active rust into a stable compound. This can involve carefully applied chemical solutions or even laser cleaning, where a focused beam vaporizes the corrosion without heating or damaging the sound metal beneath. Once stabilized, the iron is often coated with a microcrystalline wax, a breathable barrier that shields it from moisture in the air without trapping it underneath. Perhaps the most dramatic preservation efforts are full reconstructions. In some castles, where only the stone gatehouse remains, teams of dedicated craftsmen and historians embark on a project to rebuild the gate as it once was. They source giant oaks from sustainable forests, season the timber for years, and hand-forge ironwork using blacksmithing techniques unchanged since the Middle Ages. They follow the original joinery marks found in the stone, the ghostly impressions left by the first gate. This is not a theme park creation, it is experimental archaeology in action. When you pull on the rope to lift a newly recreated drawbridge, you are feeling the same staggering weight, hearing the same groan of timber and chain that a medieval guard would have known. It is a physical conversation with the past, so when you stand before a preserved gate in a museum or a restored castle, you are not just looking at an old door. You are witnessing a modern victory. You are seeing the result of countless hours of silent, meticulous work by chemists, carpenters, blacksmiths, and historians who have fought to give this stubborn, heavy object more time. They understand that the gate's true value lies in its impossible heft, in the tangible proof of the effort it took to build and move it. To preserve it is to keep that tangible lesson alive, to allow future generations to feel the awe and intimidation that its sheer mass was designed to create. The preserved gate is a bridge, not just across a moat, but across centuries, its continued existence a quiet testament to the value we still place on the weight of history itself. The medieval gate was never just a door. Its staggering weight was the brilliant, non-negotiable answer to a dozen brutal problems at once. It was a physical fortress designed to absorb the punch of a battering ram and shrug off the lick of fire, a psychological weapon that could demoralize an army before the first arrow flew. It was an economic statement carved from forest and mine, a ledger of wealth and power displayed for all to see, and beneath it all, it was a masterpiece of silent engineering, a symphony of balance where counterweights danced and iron-clad oak pivoted on a single, rugged point. That immense mass was not a design flaw or a primitive solution, it was the very essence of its success. Every groan of its hinges, every inch of its swing, spoke of a world where security was measured in tons and control was etched into the grain of ancient timber. So the next time you stand before a castle ruin or see one flicker on a screen, pause for a moment at the gateway, look past the stone arch and see the ghost of that heavy barrier. Consider the thousands of hours of labor, the strategic genius, and the sheer will to endure that it represents. Think of the stories it sealed in and the armies it held out. Then we would love to hear from you. What is your favorite castle gate, and what mysteries do you think its heavy timbers still guard? Share your thoughts in the comments below.